My mother-in-law made my life a living hell. I made her the star of my own shame. She humiliated me, controlled me, but I kept quiet. When I had the evidence piled up, I sent it to a family chat room, and just sat back and drank tea. Then I exposed her manipulations. I still remember the first time I saw Chris, his easy smile, the way his laughter filled the air, making everything around him feel light. It was at a local cafe, one of those places with old brick walls and the kind of charm you can't fake. He was sitting across from me, a cup of coffee in front of him, and he had this energy about him that made me feel like I had just stepped into the most exciting chapter of my life. We hit it off immediately. The conversation flowed effortlessly, about everything and nothing. We talked about the places we wanted to visit, the books we had read, the food we loved, and our mutual obsession with random trivia. He was warm, thoughtful, and incredibly funny, everything I thought I had been waiting for. I felt like I was finally meeting someone who understood me, who didn't try to be anything other than themselves. At the time, I didn't think much about his family. I was too caught up in the whirlwind of getting to know him. But, as we spent more time together, I began to hear stories about his mother. Chris adored her, that much was clear. He would talk about her often, recounting stories from his childhood, laughing at how strict she had been when he was younger, and how she always made sure he stayed on the right path. At first, I thought it was sweet. After all, I had a good relationship with my own mother, so I assumed that's just how families were. But then, he started mentioning her more frequently. "Martha will want to meet you soon," he'd say casually, almost as if it were a given. "She's really excited to meet the woman who's going to be my wife." There was a tone in his voice that made it sound like he couldn't wait for us to be a big, happy family. I wasn't sure how I felt about meeting her, but Chris was always so positive about their relationship, so I brushed off the feeling of unease that lingered in the back of my mind. When I finally met her, I wasn't prepared for what came next. She was exactly as Chris had described, but with a chill in the air I hadn't expected. Martha was in her early 50s, tall and slender, with sharp features that made her seem almost too perfect. Her smile was tight, as though she was constantly holding something back. I could tell right away that she had a strong presence, the kind that made people sit a little straighter in their chairs. "Nice to meet you, Emily," she said, her voice smooth but clipped, like she was judging me before I even spoke. Her handshake was firm, almost too firm, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she was measuring me up. Chris introduced us with that same warm smile he always had, but there was something in his eyes when he looked at her, a subtle tension that made me uncomfortable. Martha's gaze flicked over to him, and there was a brief, almost imperceptible exchange between them that made my stomach turn. We sat down to dinner, and Chris couldn't stop talking about the plans we had for the future. I could see Martha's eyes narrowing slightly as she listened, and it wasn't long before she started offering unsolicited advice. "You know," she said, taking a sip of her wine, "Chris always liked things to be a certain way. I just hope you can handle his quirks." Her words were polite, but there was a sharpness to them. Chris laughed it off, brushing her comment aside with a playful joke, but I could feel the weight of her eyes on me. It wasn't overt, nothing blatant, but there was a definite undercurrent of disapproval. By the end of the evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was sizing me up, silently judging every word I said, every move I made. "I'm sure we'll get along just fine," I said, forcing a smile as I stood to leave. Martha didn't respond immediately. She just looked at me for a long moment, her eyes cold, calculating. Then she nodded. "We'll see." The next few weeks passed in a blur. I was still floating in the bliss of our new relationship, trying to build a life with Chris, while simultaneously trying to figure out how to navigate his mother's strange, quiet presence in the background. At first, it was small things, comments here and there that didn't seem like much, but they began to add up. Martha would call at all hours of the day, and whenever Chris would pick up, I'd hear her voice through the receiver, always wanting to check in on him, making sure he was doing okay. reminding him about things he hadn't even thought about. "Did you eat lunch today?" she'd ask, her voice dripping with concern. "You've got to take care of yourself, sweetheart." I thought it was sweet at first. After all, it's nice when a mother cares, but after a while, it started to feel like control, like she was trying to insert herself into every aspect of his life, like I wasn't even there. And when she called, he would drop everything. He'd stop whatever he was doing, pause the movie we were watching, and take her call. It made me feel invisible. The real turning point, though, came when we decided to get engaged. I had known Chris was planning to propose for months, but when he finally did it, I expected it to be a moment of pure joy. Instead, there was a strange tension in the air. We had just sat down for dinner at my favorite Italian restaurant. Chris had been acting a little off all day, distracted, as if something was on his mind. I didn't think much of it, assuming it was just pre-proposal nerves. But as we clinked our glasses together to celebrate, I saw him hesitate, almost imperceptibly. Then, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. "Emily," he said, his voice a little shaky, "I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" I was ecstatic, tears welled up in my eyes as I said yes, but before I could even slip the ring on my finger, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Chris's mom. "Is this really the right decision? I don't know if she's the one for you, Chris." I stared at the text, feeling the air rush out of my lungs. Chris saw my face and immediately grabbed my hand. "It's just my mom, don't let her get to you. She's just worried about me." But I couldn't help it. A little voice in my head told me that this was just the beginning. The cracks were already showing. And I was starting to realize, things with Martha were not going to be as easy as I had hoped. The wedding came and went, but it was never what I imagined. Martha's presence was like a shadow over everything. The weeks leading up to the big day were filled with passive-aggressive comments from her. She found any opportunity to help with the planning, but her help always felt more like control. "Are you sure you want that color for the bridesmaids' dresses?" she asked, inspecting the swatches I had spent hours picking out. "It's not very flattering." I tried to smile and nod, but something inside me was beginning to break. Every time I tried to make a decision, I felt her gaze on me, silent, critical, waiting for me to slip up. Chris, of course, didn't see it. He was caught up in the excitement of our wedding. "Don't mind her. She's just trying to make sure everything's perfect," he'd tell me, brushing off any tension. But I wasn't so sure anymore. It wasn't just the wedding, it was everything. After the wedding, it got worse. Martha began showing up at our house uninvited, unannounced, like she had every right to be there. She'd come in with her trademark cold smile, bringing some overly elaborate dish that we didn't ask for, then proceed to rearrange my kitchen or give me unsolicited advice on how to clean. Once, I was sitting at the kitchen table, eating lunch, when Martha walked in without knocking. "Is that all you're eating?" she asked, eyeing my plate. "You know, you should be careful. You're not as young as you used to be. Pregnancy will come soon, I hope." I felt my face flush with anger, but I didn't say anything. I wanted to, but something in me was holding me back. What would Chris think if I confronted her? She was his mother, after all. But I started feeling small, like I was being suffocated by her constant presence, by her need to control every little detail of my life. Then came the real kicker, the thing that pushed me to the edge, the moment when I knew I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. Chris and I were trying to adjust to our new life, planning for our first child. I was excited, nervous, but mostly, I was thrilled. But Martha had other plans. "I think you should start doing prenatal yoga," she suggested one day, as she sat across from me, eating a salad. "It's essential, you know, for your mental well-being, and for the baby." I smiled and nodded, trying to brush it off, but then she went on. "Have you considered hiring a live-in nanny for when the baby's born?" she asked, a slight smile tugging at her lips, as if the idea had been brewing for a while. I think it's a good idea, especially for you. You don't want to be overwhelmed, do you? I blinked, surprised by how forward she was being. We're not hiring a nanny, I said, trying to keep my tone calm. We'll manage. I want to take care of the baby on my own. Martha tilted her head and raised an eyebrow. Of course, if you say so. Her words were laced with an almost imperceptible sarcasm. But let me know if you change your mind. I'd be happy to help. That was the moment everything changed. I realized that her need to help wasn't about love or care. It was about control. She wasn't trying to help me. She was trying to control every aspect of my life, down to the smallest detail. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't keep living in a house where I was constantly second-guessed, constantly scrutinized. I had to find a way out. That night, after Martha left, I sat in our living room, staring at my phone. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I needed something, a way to make this stop. Then I had an idea. It wasn't something I would have considered before, but I was desperate. I pulled out an old voice recorder that I had stashed in the drawer for years, mostly forgotten. I had used it for work, but it had never occurred to me to use it in my personal life. I started recording. At first, I didn't even know what I was looking for, just some proof. Something to show Chris that I wasn't being paranoid. But over the course of the next few weeks, as Martha's visits became more frequent, I realized that I had started gathering something much more than just proof. I was collecting ammunition. She was ruthless. Her comments, her passive-aggressive remarks, her constant undermining of everything I did, it was all there, captured in real time. She would call me incompetent, belittle my decisions, criticize my parenting choices, and tell Chris that I was making mistakes. There were days I could barely stomach listening to the recordings, but I knew it was necessary. I knew that one day, I would need to confront her with the truth. I spent months collecting every conversation, every moment that made me feel like I was drowning in Martha's control. There was something strangely empowering about it. Each time I pressed record, it felt like I was taking back a small piece of my life. Every cruel jab, every undermining comment, every time she pretended to be the victim, it was all there. And each time I listened to the recordings, I grew colder. The longer this dragged on, the more I realized that I was not just collecting evidence, I was building a case. I was preparing for war. But this war wasn't going to be won by shouting matches or physical confrontations. No, I was going to use something much more powerful, silence, the kind of silence that speaks louder than words. I had thought long and hard about my next steps. Chris had to see the truth for himself, and that's when it hit me. A confrontation would be pointless. The moment I tried to sit him down and tell him what Martha was doing, he would probably defend her. I knew him. She had been manipulating him for years, feeding him half-truths and lies. She had him wrapped around her finger, and he couldn't even see it. No, what I needed was a different strategy. I wasn't going to tell him what was happening. I was going to show him. I spent days preparing. I carefully organized the voice recordings, listening to every one of them, and selecting the most damning. I found moments where Martha subtly attacked me, questioned my abilities, and tried to turn Chris against me. I picked out her comments about raising our child, the suggestions about my supposed inadequacies. It was all there, neatly categorized. I knew I had to be strategic. I had to set the scene perfectly. It had to be subtle, so subtle that no one could accuse me of staging anything. Then, one Sunday afternoon, Chris invited Martha over for a family get-together. It was one of those rare times when it was just the three of us. No extended family, no one else to distract from the tension. I knew it would be the perfect opportunity to execute my plan. I had been waiting for this moment for so long. I kept my cool, put on my best smile, and made tea as Martha and Chris chatted casually in the living room. The tension that had been building in me over the years felt almost suffocating, but I didn't let it show. I was calm. I was in control. While they were busy talking, I discreetly grabbed my phone and opened up the family chat. I made sure to double-check everything. I had already created a folder on my phone, filled with the voice recordings and photos from the last picnic. It was harmless at first glance, just a simple collection of memories from an afternoon spent outside. But the voice notes, well, those would speak for themselves. As I sent the folder, I made sure to casually glance at my phone screen one last time before setting it down on the counter. I couldn't help but smile to myself. The trap was set. I had already started preparing the tea when I noticed Chris walking into the kitchen, his usual smile on his face. He didn't even look at the phone. He was too busy asking if I had any cookies. I put the tea in front of him, keeping my face neutral, my heart racing in my chest. "You okay?" he asked, his eyes softening with concern. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Of course, just making tea." We sat down at the table, but my mind was elsewhere. I could hear Martha's voice from the living room, chattering away as usual. Chris was still talking to her when suddenly, I saw a notification light up on my phone. It was the family chat. And then I heard it. Martha's voice, clear, loud, and unmistakable, coming through the phone, filling the room. She had been recorded, the voice note playing at full volume. "She doesn't know what she's doing," Martha's voice echoed. "She's not fit to be a mother. She doesn't have the strength. I can't believe Chris is letting her ruin the child's life like this." I froze. Chris looked up, confused. He reached for my phone, and I watched, heart pounding, as the audio continued to play. "She can't even make simple decisions. It's so embarrassing. Chris deserves better." Martha's words poured out, and I could see Chris's face change. First, confusion, then shock. His eyes flicked from the phone back to me. I didn't speak. I just calmly took a sip of my tea, pretending to be unfazed. Chris glanced at me, then back at the phone, his expression now one of disbelief. The next voice note started playing, another conversation. This time Martha speaking to her sister about me, the way she mocked me, the way she belittled me, every word felt like a dagger. It went on. I didn't have to do anything now. The truth was speaking for itself. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the last recording ended. There was a long silence. Chris was staring at the phone, his face pale. I could see the anger bubbling up inside him, but there was something else too, regret. Martha stood in the living room, her voice trailing off. She had no idea what had just happened. I calmly stood up, refilled my cup, and placed it in front of Chris. "I think I sent the wrong folder," I said softly, my voice cool, almost indifferent. Chris's gaze shot up at me, and for the first time in years, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time: guilt. The silence that followed my words seemed endless, yet it was the most powerful silence I'd ever experienced. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I watched as Chris slowly processed what had just happened, his mind racing, the pieces of the puzzle finally falling into place. He didn't say anything at first. Instead, he sat there, his eyes still fixed on the phone. His face was unreadable, a mixture of disbelief and something else, shame, perhaps. He had been living in a bubble Martha had so carefully crafted around him. And now, for the first time in years, that bubble had burst. I could feel the weight of his gaze on me as he finally looked up. His lips parted, but he said nothing. It was as if he were searching for the right words, but there were none. How could he defend his mother now? How could he ignore the truth that was laid bare before him? Why didn't you tell me?" he finally managed, his voice trembling, his hands clenched into fists as if he were holding back something bigger than just words. I took a deep breath and met his eyes, my heart still steady but the anger bubbling just beneath the surface. "Chris, I tried for years, but you always defended her. You always believed she was just a loving mother, a victim. It was easier to blame me than face the truth, but I couldn't keep letting her destroy me. I couldn't let her destroy our family." His eyes flickered with something, guilt, maybe even regret. But there was something else there too, something raw, something that made me believe that, for once, he saw it. He saw her for what she truly was. I didn't wait for him to respond. I knew he needed time to process. And frankly, I was done waiting. I had shown him the truth. Now, it was up to him to decide what to do with it. I turned and walked away, leaving him to stew in his thoughts. I didn't need his immediate reaction. What I needed was space to breathe, to reclaim my power, and to finally feel the weight of victory. But before I could get too far, I heard Martha's voice from the living room. "Chris, what's going on? What are you looking at?" She sounded confused, innocent even. She had no idea what had just unfolded. Chris didn't answer. Instead, he stood up abruptly, his movements sharp and erratic. I could hear him walking towards the living room, his footsteps heavy with the burden of realization. I stayed where I was, my back to the kitchen counter, the taste of tea still lingering in my mouth. I didn't need to see what happened next. I didn't need to hear the confrontation that was about to unfold between mother and son. I knew how it would end. I'd made sure of that. For the first time in years, I felt calm. It was a strange feeling, almost like I was floating above it all, untouchable. Moments later, I heard the unmistakable sound of Martha's voice, high-pitched and panicked, drifting from the living room. "Chris, you don't understand. I didn't mean." But Chris's voice interrupted her. It wasn't loud, but it was firm, resolute. "No, Mom, I see it now. I see everything. You've been lying to me, manipulating me. You've been tearing us apart, and I let you." I closed my eyes. I could feel the tension in his voice, the struggle within him. But there was something else, something that told me that, in that moment, he was finally seeing the woman his mother truly was. The silence stretched again, but this time, it was different. It wasn't the suffocating silence of manipulation, it was the silence of a man finally waking up. I didn't need to hear the rest of the conversation. I knew Martha's protests would be endless. She'd deny everything, try to twist the narrative, but the truth had already been laid out. She couldn't escape it, not this time. When Chris finally returned to the kitchen, his face was pale, and his eyes were filled with an emotion I couldn't quite place, guilt, shame, but also something like relief. I don't know what to say," he murmured, his voice hollow. I nodded, understanding the weight of his words. There was nothing to say. The damage had been done, but it was done. And now, it was time for something else. "We'll figure this out," I said softly, my voice steady. "But the first thing you need to do is make sure your mom understands that this isn't okay. You have to set boundaries. We can't go back to how things were." Chris nodded slowly, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I will, I promise." I knew it wouldn't be easy. Martha wouldn't give up without a fight. But this was a victory, and it was mine. Not because I had humiliated her, but because I had done something far more powerful. I had exposed her for what she truly was, and I had done it without raising my voice, without anger, without violence. I had used silence, patience, and the truth to get to this point. And now, I was free. The next few weeks were tense, no doubt. Chris and Martha had their fair share of difficult conversations, but what mattered was that Chris finally understood. He saw her for what she was, toxic, manipulative, and controlling. He began to set boundaries with her, something he had never done before. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. As for me, I continued to build the life I had always wanted, one where I was respected, heard, and free from the chains Martha had tried to put around me. I didn't need to be vindictive. The truth had done all the work for me, and in the end, that was enough. I smiled to myself as I poured the last of my tea, savoring the quiet victory. The storm had passed, and in its wake, I was stronger than ever before. I had taken control of my life, and no one, especially not Martha, was going to take that away from me.